Well, let me start with the UUP comments. Do you have any idea of the breakdown of the in SUNY regarding new faculty? Is that something that you are dependent on the systems for, or through the union do you have a sense of the breakdown between full-time in the classroom and full-time researchers?
It's actually difficult for us to discern the difference between in the classroom faculty and researchers based on the data that we get from SUNY. We certainly can differentiate part-time, full-time, those on the tenure track, those not on the tenure track, but we don't know exactly what their professional obligation is based on the data that we get.
Okay. On the issue of the EdTPA, my friend Assemblymember Lifton has been very vigorous on this particular issue. In the teaching programs, they have seen apparently reductions in the number of students that are participating. Do you think that that is in part because of the what students are hearing about the methodology that's being used for the certification, or are there other factors?
I think it's really a perfect storm of a number of things coming together. So as I indicated, I think the declines started even before the new certification exams were instituted, and I think that had more to do with what was going on in the K-12 world and kind of the more general denigration and deprofessionalization of teaching. We hear from a lot of our students, even those who are committed to entering and finishing teacher education programs, my parents are telling me not to do this, my neighbors, I mean, so that's part of what we're fighting against. But the other thing is that the new certification package has just exacerbated that pretty significantly. And in addition to declining enrollment, students going into teacher education programs, the other thing we're seeing is the brain drain. The students who are in those programs and will finish those programs, a growing proportion of them are not completing certification in New York State. And so one indicator is registration for the EdTPA. We were at a meeting last week, and one of our campus program directors said 50% of the students who graduated from our teacher education program last year did not register to complete the EdTPA, meaning they have decided, because probably they feel they cannot complete it for a variety of reasons, they've just written off the possibility of getting certified in New York State. And on top of that, the recruitment from out-of-state school districts has really been increasing. We have some figures in our report about that. So the teacher certification debacle in New York State is becoming widely known across the country, and recruiters are coming to recruit our students away. So it's both, you know, declining enrollments, but among those who are in our programs, and again, public and private programs, a subset of those students deciding I can't afford to try to get certified, or they're having problems with particular exams, whether it's the EdTPA or one of the other three, and they're not planning to stay in New York State to teach.
If they want to stay in New York and they don't want to be certified, they could teach in private schools, correct?
Yeah, well, they could potentially, at least on the short term. I think certainly the requirements for completion of the EdTPA are much less rigorous. I'm not really sure how good a possibility there is that they could stay in teaching without getting certified in New York State. But certainly that is an initial pathway that some students are likely to try. And we do have a significant number of teachers who are not certified in some of those schools.
Maybe I can just ask you to sort of opine on the general condition of the facilities that are around the state. We have a rather small amount of capital allocated in this budget, and we've heard from the systems that there are substantially more needs. And what are you hearing? And are there areas, for example, if you're teaching in one of the STEM disciplines, then maybe the labs facilities are antiquated and are not up to, if you're trying to do work on your own with your students in engineering, the types of equipment might not be. So can you?
Yeah, we are certainly hearing some of that, and I think there's a lot of variation across the campuses, but I think one pattern that needs to be explored is this, that we have seen some significant improvements in capital. For example, new science buildings to address the declining infrastructure for labs and those things. So that is happening and has happened under previous capital allocations. There are still many that are not up to speed, but I think what we're also hearing is the less, focused on disciplines and areas are likely to be neglected. So you can sometimes have outstanding facilities in some areas, literally in some buildings, but then the more basic arts and sciences, humanities, those buildings are often less likely to get to the top of the list in terms. So I think it's a mixed bag.
Thank you very much. Professor Bowen,
Assembly member.
If you could talk a little bit about the issue of recruiting new professors and how the uncertainty around having solving the collective bargaining agreement, what impact has that had at the City University?
Tremendous impact, and maybe Mike Fabricant will also say a word about it. But as you know, it's a long process to recruit a full-time faculty member. It takes several months, sometimes 6 months, because it's a national competition. So people are looking, they're in California or they're based in Ohio or wherever else, and they're considering a job. I myself have heard from department chairs that they will go to their top candidate on the list and the person will say, I really want to teach at CUNY because I believe in the mission. I mean, this is why I came to CUNY. I know exactly why people come to CUNY, because it's why I came to CUNY. You believe in the mission, you believe in the great, intellectually explosive possibility of a really varied student body with tremendous range of experience that they bring to the classroom, and then you also are reaching students who otherwise wouldn't have the chance for college. That's why people want to come to CUNY. Then they hear what the salaries are, and then they look at where they might possibly live. And it's those two things that make them say, I'm sorry, I'm going to turn down the job. We have heard from department chairs who will go through several of their top candidates. They'll work very hard to recruit people. They'll work very hard to recruit candidates of color in higher ed. And those candidates will say, I mean, I've heard it from somebody with tears in her eyes, say, I'm turning it down because I can't honestly and responsibly bring my own family into a city where I'm going to have to live literally 2 hours away in order to afford anything, and the salary is $40,000 below Rutgers or University of Connecticut. People are willing to make some sacrifice to come to CUNY, but not to give up their entire career prospects because there's so little support for research, and also to put their own families in jeopardy. So we are hearing it every day, every day. I don't know if, Mike, you wanted to say.
The only thing I would add is that it takes a couple of things. It takes a long, long time to build a department, very long time, quality department. It takes a very, very short time to destroy it. And so some part of what we're also beginning to see is the out-migration of some of our best faculty who have other choices to other parts of the country or other parts of the region. I mean, it's not an accident that when we did our own little survey about 5, 6 years ago, not every university, but most of the major universities in the region were included. We were third from the bottom. That was 5 years ago, before this basically impasse regarding contract and negotiations. So we're clearly somewhere near or at the bottom in terms of salaries of faculty in the region. And that puts us in an essentially increasingly uncompetitive situation with other folks.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Toby Stavisky.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the testimony from the two chancellors. Is there anything you wish to comment on or agree with or disagree with?
Jamie, do you want to go first?
Well, if I may.
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, again, I think that the chancellor, the SUNY chancellor's emphasis on all of the new initiatives is very encouraging on the one hand, but I think that what we are seeing is increasing concern that the basic activities that our institutions need to fulfill their basic missions are being put on the back burner. So we are concerned, the projections for the increased number of students in SUNY, when we hear that, that immediately raises questions across our campuses. How are we going to do that? And certainly, how are we going to do that in a high-quality way, particularly when we know that our existing students need more services, more attention, more mentoring, more clinical experiences. So that's one important situation. I think the other thing I would also be concerned about has to do with the tuition situation. And aside from what we learned from our members and our students, I'm the parent of a SUNY student, so I can tell you that it isn't just the tuition increases. What has also been happening are increases in fees. And when you mention, for example, the STEM fields, I mean, my son is in the sciences. He can, books, supplies, he can easily spend $100 to $150 for one lab manual. So, when we want to recruit students from a variety of backgrounds into these kinds of fields, we have to recognize that in addition to the tuition, many of the things that the universities can't fund anymore are being funded by the students through increased fees. So I was concerned about the lack of attention to that.
Thank you, Senator Stavisky. If I could add in, we certainly agree with the Chancellor of CUNY in his statement that CUNY needs more funding. He added that to his statement. I don't think he put a specific number on that, but I think that was an important recognition. Obviously, we agree strongly that the contract must be settled. He said that that was a top priority for him. I did not, however, hear him insist that the $240 million must remain in an enacted budget. I hope that that is the position that he has taken, and also that that $240 million needs to be supplemented if we are actually going to get to a contract deal. So we feel that very strongly. And also, I know that the legislators asked him several times about the proposal to do, quote, cost sharing. And certainly one doesn't want to step in between discussions that are already ongoing with the city and the state. I understand that, but let me just be frank. What's in the budget now is a cut. It's a proposed cut. It appears in parentheses on the page, it's page 100 in the state budget document. And so until that is filled in, that is a cut. And that is a 30% cut in the state's allocation to the four-year colleges at CUNY, with the, I would say, respectfully, thin justification that this would align the funding with the governance structure. In fact, it would misalign CUNY funding with SUNY funding, and it's based on a fiction about what city and state shares of the funding for four-year colleges should be. In fact, the city does contribute to the four-year colleges in a way that's anomalous around the state. Most cities do not contribute anything to four-year colleges. Because there are some associates programs in our four-year schools, the city contributes because the city is responsible for contributions on the associate degrees. That's why that small amount is there. So I would have a different emphasis, let me put it that way, than the emphasis I heard from the Chancellor about the urgency of that amount. But I would also say, let's not be so caught up in trying to think through a complicated political proposal about city and state and lose sight of the fact that what we really should concentrate on is that funding for CUNY has gone down. And despite this governor's presentation of this state as interested in economic development and public higher education and having a signature proposal like SUNY 2020, the result has actually been defunding CUNY. And we just have to face, as a state, whether that's our political decision, to defund the college that educates working class people, people of color, moderate income people in the city, or do we want to fund that adequately? And that's why I am very happy to have you to work in partnership with.
Thank you. Thank you. Sounds like
Thank you. Further questions? Good. Any further, Darcy? You.
Thank you. Hi, thank you. I suppose not a question, just a closing comment. I thank you all for testifying. I really appreciate Barbara Bowen's testimony about the true reality of the history of funding for CUNY and the difference between rhetoric and reality about whether we treat CUNY or SUNY differently. And I feel quite strongly that it is not acceptable for the state to start down the road of treating CUNY as the, I don't know, the orphan child. Not to imply that SUNY is getting too much, just the opposite. But this is truly a disturbing proposal this year in the budget. I also appreciate all of you highlighting that not investing in our higher education programs is the equivalent of not investing in our infrastructure. And the correlation, and your chancellors made the points earlier, that it's economic development to invest in quality education. And then the chancellor of the state education department was here going into detail about the necessity of ensuring we have an educated workforce. And so the fact that we are spending an enormous amount of money in programs we call economic development. We had a hearing last week where I couldn't get any answers of how much of a return we're getting on those. And yet there's plenty of research on the return you get from investing in higher education, particularly for low-income students, and how much that turns around the amount of earnings they have and what they can invest back in their communities. So I appreciate you all bringing us back to that reality.
Thank you.
And because I'm the wife of a pissed-off CUNY professor, I will not comment on the fact that you don't have a contract. Thank you.
that's a technical term. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Very technical term.
Yes, that's what it is. Anglin. Laura Anglin, President, Commission on Independent Colleges and Universities, CICU.
Good afternoon,
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
or evening, almost evening. I guess it is
No,
evening,
it
so
is
good
evening.
evening. I want to thank all of you for a very long day, and I appreciate the fact that there's so many of you still here. I'm Laura Anglin, the president of the Commission on Independent Colleges and University, and thank you for allowing me to testify today on behalf of the independent sector of higher education here in New York State. With me today is my colleague, Terry Standish-Kuon, who is my vice president for public affairs. You have my testimony before you, and I do not plan to read it. It is quite lengthy. I'd rather just like to highlight a few key points and then take any comments or questions that you might have. But first of all, there really are too few opportunities to publicly express the appreciation. So first and foremost, on behalf of our students, I thank you for everything you do, and I thank you for supporting over 270 colleges and universities in the state of New York and over 1.2 million students. Without the work you have done, our students would not be as strong as they are, and our higher education system would not be as strong. The independent sector is deeply grateful for the state's investment in the TAP program, and I know that's been talked about a lot today, as well as our opportunity programs such as HEOP, STEP, C-STEP, and LPP. We are especially grateful for the 15% funding increase for each of our opportunity programs that we saw in last year's budget, and we're quite pleased that that increase was carried over into the base this year. One of our proposals this year to ensure that student aid can continue to serve its purpose would be to increase the TAP maximum to $6,500, and I talked about this last year. TAP was last increased in 2014 by $165, but prior to that, it was more than a decade ago when that program was increased. More than 5 million New Yorkers have used TAP to meet their college expenses since its creation of more than 45 years ago, and I'm proud to say that I am one of that 5 million who was a TAP student as I went through college. In addition to increasing the maximum award, we want to ensure that applying for TAP continues to be easy for our students and families. And I know that this was talked about earlier today, but recent actions by the federal government will now allow New York families applying for TAP to use prior tax year returns, using 2-year prior tax information for the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, as we know it, as opposed to 1 prior year as we have right now, will increase the form's accuracy and give families an earlier and better idea of their anticipated financial aid and college costs. We are doing a little research now as to what the rest of the states are doing with regards to prior, but it appears now that New York may be the only state that actually requires a statutory amendment to conform. And unfortunately, we feel if we do not conform, families will be confused, and some may not even realize the difference between the two. So we have talked to the governor's office about that and asked for that to be a 30-day amendment, but we would like to see that definitely be part of the final enacted budget. And finally, with respect to tuition assistance, and I know this has been raised a couple of times today, that I would like to start the conversation of reimagining graduate tuition assistance, or TAP. We know that it was eliminated in 2010 and 11, and we also know that in the next 6 years, jobs requiring a master's degree will grow by more than 18%, and by 16% for doctoral and professional degrees. Let us help our young professionals or adults looking to change career paths to prepare for occupations such as accounting, teaching, physical therapy, and many others. Also, as we see the traditional college student as being redefined, the independent sector is adapting to provide greater opportunities that meet the personal realities for all those seeking a higher education. Whether it is adult learners or veterans or part-time students, many of these students are seeking out a higher education require some special help, and programs such as HEOP, C-STEP, STEP, and LPP have all proven to be effectively serve these changing student populations. Therefore, we would love to see New York actually double funding for these opportunities by 2020, and if we continue with a 15% increase to the base that we saw last year, we believe we would be able to do that. So that is something that we would love to talk and work with you on. We also talked a little bit earlier about the Uniform Financial Aid Award Letter. So I would like to talk just a minute about that, because it's quite timely that I received an email from one of my schools today, and the email was just to let us know that their software provider has no plans on providing an electronic solution to produce New York's Financial Aid Award Letter. So my fear is that as we go through this and its implementation, that many of the schools, or most of the schools, do use software providers to prepare these financial aid award letters, and I'm not sure that we're going to have the resources to be able to do that. So that's something that we'd like to continue to work with the governor's office, DFS, HESC, as well as you on to figure out if there's perhaps some changes that we can make to the statute that was adopted last year so that we can implement it and provide good and important information to our students or our families. With regards to the STEM Incentive Scholarship Program, once again, we would ask to be included within that program. Our state is projected to have nearly 500,000 STEM jobs by 2018, and our sector does produce about 56% of the bachelor's degrees in the STEM fields and 72% in the graduate degrees. Therefore, I do urge the state to expand that program to include our students in the independent sector. Let us tap into the built-in strength of all our sectors of higher education so that talented students can take their scholarship dollars to any college or university where they might want to attend so that we can continue to make sure that we are a leader in these fields. In addition, another scholarship program I'd just like to mention is our Master's in Teaching Education program. In addition to STEM fields, we are leaders in conferring master education degrees in New York State. About 67% of the degrees are conferred by independent sector schools. And I think this data has been talked about earlier. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, employment of kindergarten and elementary school teachers is expected to grow by 6% by 2024. So we feel like there will be a shortage in this area to have teachers. So we should all work together to make sure that the decline we're seeing in the number of adults seeking higher education and teaching degrees is reversed. I'd also like to talk just briefly about another proposal that was adopted last year, and this was the graduate level teacher education regulations and requirements that were adopted last year. And part of this proposal was to try to attract highly competent teachers into our schools and into the workforce. Therefore, last year, new admission requirements were crafted and adopted for teacher education. Specifically, the new requirements held that institutions with graduate level teacher education and school leadership programs must adopt rigorous standards, which included a GPA of 3.0 or higher in the candidate's undergraduate program and a minimum score on the GRE or equivalent test. As we are walking through and going through the implementation and talking with our members about the implementation, we are receiving a lot of feedback from faculty and admissions experts. We would like to talk to you about making some changes to these requirements in order to ensure that our future teacher workforce represents the diversity that makes up our classrooms, and that those individuals, especially those in changing careers who might not have had an undergraduate degree for many years, that we don't require them to now go back and take the GRE. We have a lot of adult learners that I think veterans and other people that would be wonderful teachers, and we should encourage those to attend our programs. And finally, let me just touch, a lot was talked about in previous testimony about the impact of higher education on our economy. New York is very fortunate to have a very strong sector of higher education and very wonderful asset. Our sector alone contributes more than $74 billion annually to the state's economy, and we generate over 394,000 jobs annually with taxes paid of about $1.9 billion. There are some wonderful programs that are included within the budget that we'd like to continue to see included in the final enacted budget, including our HECAP, our matching grant program. We'd love to see the faculty development program and the technology transfer incentive program, which last received funding 2 years ago, to see some funding again. We're supportive of another round of REDC funding, and we've been working to try to enhance participation in the Startup New York program. We also have wonderful colleges and universities that participate in the Centers of Excellence and our CATs and our hotspots and incubators. And of course, the Stem Cell Innovation Fund has been a program for many, many years of funding. And then finally, the last program that you'll see as one of our priority is called the Community Solutions Matching Grant Program. Colleges and universities have long been great community partners, and we propose a new matching grant program whereby the state can further leverage the terrific work that higher education is doing to improve the lives of all New Yorkers. So we'll have some more details of that program as we put out our priorities. So in closing, I would like to thank the legislature for its support for students and key programs, that allow them to have access to higher education. Let us build on the momentum that we've seen last year and over the last few years as we continue to invest in our students. I look forward to working with you this year, and I'm happy to take any questions or hear any comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Deborah, Glick?
Thank you. Do you have any idea, you have a lot of member colleges and universities.
I do.
Do they have a rough idea of how many teaching students they produce each year?
We have 74, about 70, a little over 70 schools, and I can get you the exact number of how many degrees that are conferred. Terry, do you know that number off the top?
It's about 67% of the master's degrees, about 43% overall, but Assemblymember, we will get to the detail.
Yeah,
exactly.
I didn't expect you to have the, I would have been amazed. But in that same vein, the issue that you raise about the threshold that was inserted in last year's negotiations, that created a little bit of a, in my view, a very arbitrary and perhaps inappropriate line. I've heard from other people that there are folks whose ability to communicate, you have some people who could have a 3.5, very intellectual, very cerebral, and have no ability to actually connect and communicate. So this is a broader discussion that we're having around how do you determine who are the best teachers, who are the best candidates, who do you suggest might want to shift gears. I think that's an ongoing discussion, and I'm wondering whether any of your schools are participating in thinking about figuring it out sooner than at the end of the track, whether there are things they're instituting to determine the suitability of somebody to be a teacher.